What if I told you that Steven Seagal, the Hollywood martial arts star known for his bone-crushing Aikido throws, once got into a real fight so brutal that even Hollywood tried to bury the story? This wasn't choreographed. This wasn't stunt doubles or scripted combat. This was raw, unscripted violence that tested whether Seagal was truly the master he claimed to be or just another actor playing tough. The truth? The real fight was uglier, more humiliating, and far more shocking than anything in his movies. And to this day, it remains one of the most controversial moments in martial arts history. Steven Seagal wasn't just another actor. When he exploded onto the Hollywood scene in the late 1980s with Above the Law, fans were mesmerized. Unlike Stallone or Schwarzenegger, who relied on brute strength and explosive gunplay, Seagal brought something different: precision, technique, and devastating Aikido moves that left enemies broken and gasping. His characters didn't just fight, they dominated. A flick of his wrist sent attackers flying. A chokehold ended a brawl in seconds. In films like Hard to Kill and Under Siege, Seagal was portrayed as untouchable, a man whose martial arts mastery made him immune to pain, fear, or defeat. And that's where the problem began. Because when you convince the world you're unbeatable, sooner or later, someone is going to test you. Behind the scenes, martial artists across the globe began whispering, was Steven Seagal really as dangerous as his movies showed? Aikido, after all, was often criticized for being too cooperative, techniques that looked flashy in demonstrations but questionable in a real fight. Fighters from disciplines like judo, jiu-jitsu, and MMA scoffed, and one man in particular, a legendary stuntman and martial artist named Gene LeBell, wasn't buying the hype. Known as Judo Gene, LeBell wasn't just a stunt coordinator. He was a real fighter, a grappler who had trained boxers, wrestlers, and even MMA pioneers. His resume was built on actual combat, not camera tricks. LeBell heard Seagal's boasts on movie sets, that no man alive could choke him out, that his Aikido was unbeatable, that anyone who tried would pay dearly. And Gene LeBell decided to call his bluff. It happened in the early 1990s during the filming of Out for Justice. Seagal was on set, strutting his dominance not just as the star, but also as a self-proclaimed martial arts authority. Cast and crew remember him bragging loudly that no stuntman, no martial artist, and certainly no Hollywood tough guy could take him down. According to witnesses, Seagal even claimed he was immune to chokeholds, that he had developed a breathing technique that made it physically impossible for anyone to knock him unconscious. That was all Gene LeBell needed to hear. Crew members recall the smirk on LeBell's face as he stepped forward, towering over Seagal. Calmly, he said, "Why don't we test that theory?" The set fell silent. What followed was not part of the script. It was not staged. It was two martial artists about to put their reputations on the line. Seagal, brimming with confidence, accepted the challenge. He told the crew to watch closely, because they were about to witness proof of his invincibility. LeBell, with decades of grappling experience, slid behind Seagal and locked in a rear naked choke, the same submission hold used in professional MMA to this day. At first, Seagal laughed it off, trying to resist, waving his arms to show he was still in control. But seconds later, the laughter stopped. His movements slowed. His body went limp. And then, in front of an entire movie crew, Steven Seagal collapsed to the ground, unconscious. But it didn't stop there. Because according to multiple reports, Seagal didn't just pass out. He lost control of his body. In the struggle, his bladder gave way. Hollywood's action hero had not only been choked unconscious, but had allegedly humiliated himself in the process. The set was chaos. Crew members gasped. Some laughed nervously. Others couldn't believe what they had seen. The unstoppable action star, the man whose films made millions, had just been dismantled in seconds by a 58-year-old stuntman. Word spread quickly through Hollywood and the martial arts world. Suddenly, the aura of Steven Seagal's invincibility was shattered. But Seagal wasn't about to let the story ruin him. Publicly, he denied it ever happened. He mocked the tale, calling it fabricated, insisting he had never been choked out, and certainly never humiliated. Gene LeBell, for his part, never gloated. He simply smiled whenever asked, saying, "Well, you'll have to ask Steven about that." Which, of course, only made the legend grow bigger. For fans, the fight was more than gossip. It was a revelation. If Seagal could be beaten so easily, what did that say about his on-screen image? Were his movies a fantasy? Was he just another actor who exaggerated his skills for fame and fortune? But here's the shocking truth. This real fight was far more brutal than anything Hollywood could script. Not because of the punches or the choke, but because it attacked Seagal's greatest weapon, his reputation. In the world of martial arts, respect and honor are everything. And on that day, Seagal's credibility took a blow he would never fully recover from. After the incident with Gene LeBell, Seagal's camp went into damage control. Hollywood executives didn't want their new action star being laughed at. His movies were still pulling big box office numbers, and admitting that he'd been humiliated by a stuntman could ruin the invincible Seagal brand. So, stories were silenced. Journalists who tried to dig into the fight were brushed off. Publicists spun denials. And yet, the whispers kept spreading. On martial arts forums, in stunt circles, among fighters, the story took on a life of its own. Some swore they were there. Others swore they had heard it from someone who was. Hollywood may have tried to bury it, but the truth has a way of clawing itself back to the surface. The choke wasn't just a physical defeat. It was psychological. Seagal had built his empire on being the guy who couldn't be touched. But now, every time he walked on a set, there were quiet smirks. Every time he trained, people whispered. Instead of humbling him, though, the fight seemed to make Seagal double down. He became notorious for belittling stuntmen, refusing to cooperate in choreographed fights, and even injuring his co-stars during rehearsals. Jean-Claude Van Damme famously clashed with him at Sylvester Stallone's house party in the 1990s. Witnesses claim Seagal mocked Van Damme to his face, calling him a fraud. Van Damme challenged him on the spot, twice. And both times, Seagal backed down and slipped away. The whispers grew louder. Was Steven Seagal a bully who folded under real pressure? By the 2000s, mixed martial arts was exploding. UFC stars like Anderson Silva, Randy Couture, and the Gracie family were showing the world what real fighting looked like. No camera tricks, no stunt choreography, just raw skill. And fans began asking, where does Steven Seagal fit into this? Seagal himself claimed he had secretly trained UFC fighters. He appeared in Anderson Silva's corner, taking credit for Silva's devastating front kick knockout against Vitor Belfort. He boasted that he had taught Lyoto Machida the same move, but fighters and coaches quickly laughed him off. Silva himself admitted later that Seagal's involvement was exaggerated. MMA legends like Randy Couture openly mocked Seagal, with Couture even joking that if Seagal ever wanted to step into the cage, he'd be happy to make him tap out in seconds. The MMA world saw through the Hollywood illusion. To them, Seagal's real fight had already been decided years earlier on that movie set. So why does this single fight matter so much? Why decades later are we still talking about it? Because it wasn't just about Seagal losing consciousness. It was about what it revealed. That behind the Hollywood mystique, the man wasn't as untouchable as he claimed. In martial arts, humility is sacred. Even Bruce Lee admitted his weaknesses, constantly evolving, constantly learning. But Seagal? He clung to the myth of invincibility. And that's why the humiliation cut so deep. It wasn't just a loss. It was the one thing he couldn't spin into a victory. To this day, fans remain split. Some argue that Seagal is still a legitimate martial artist. After all, he was the first American to run an Aikido dojo in Japan. His early training was real. His techniques were authentic. His films in the late 80s and early 90s showcased martial arts styles audiences had never seen before. But others insist that he's a fraud, a man who used real skills as a foundation but then exaggerated, inflated, and eventually fabricated his legacy to appear larger than life. The truth likely lies somewhere in between. Seagal was skilled but not unbeatable, talented but not superhuman. The Gene LeBell choke exposed the gap between image and reality. Today, Steven Seagal lives a quieter life, often overseas, occasionally appearing in low-budget films or making political headlines. But no matter what he does, the ghost of that fight follows him. Ask any MMA fan and they'll smirk. Wasn't he the guy who got choked out by Gene LeBell? Ask any stuntman in Hollywood, and they'll tell you the same hushed story of how the invincible action hero crumbled in seconds. The fight has become folklore, a cautionary tale about ego, humility, and the dangers of believing your own legend. The reason this real fight still fascinates us isn't just because of Seagal, it's because it pulls back the curtain on Hollywood itself. How many other stars have built entire careers on illusions? How many tough guys crumble when the lights go out and the fight is real? In Seagal's case, the answer was brutally clear. One real fight, one chokehold, one humiliating moment, and suddenly, the myth shattered. That's why, even decades later, fans remember it more vividly than his biggest movie scenes. Because unlike his films, this moment wasn't scripted. It was raw, it was real, and it was devastating. Steven Seagal's career will always be a paradox. On one hand, he gave us unforgettable films, unique fight choreography, and a larger-than-life persona that thrilled millions. On the other hand, his arrogance, his feuds, and that one infamous fight left a permanent scar on his legacy. The truth is, Steven Seagal's real fight was more brutal than his movies, not because of the physical choke, but because of what it did to his reputation. In a single moment, he went from being Hollywood's untouchable warrior to just another man who could be beaten. And maybe in the end, that's the most human thing about him.